So once we've got a good understanding of all the assets involved, we want to move on to critical points of contact. So these are people within the organization. They're vendors within the organization. Could be companies that are providing support for the SaaS environment. At the organizational level, we'll have a point of contact that's a technical point of contact. This is the person that has traditionally provided most of the technical direction of the organization. It could be multiple people. In bigger organizations, it's going to be a group of people. Somebody might be responsible for applications and desktops, and somebody might be responsible for networks and engineering, and somebody might be a PM within the organization. Those types of things. We consider all those technical roles. After that, we define administrative roles. So those are typically people that we go to when we need approval for things like creating a new user account. So think about this like director of HR. If I get a request in from the client that says I need a new user account created, somebody needs to approve that. Same thing if they're offboarding somebody. Somebody's leaving the company, then we've got to have a workflow that defines who approves those things. Same thing when it comes to other tasks that you wouldn't normally consider, like who approves desk moves. If a user comes to the IT guy and says, hey, I want to move from this desk over there to that desk. That happens a lot. And you can't just say, okay, user, I'll move you. Somebody's got to say, okay, I approve that, and that's an okay thing to do. So, and then things like, I need a cell phone, or I need a new piece of technology, or I need Adobe Pro instead of Adobe Reader. So, and some of those have a financial component, and that's where a billing contact. So we're going to gain the knowledge of the organization and get those roles defined up front so that we understand as we're going through workflow that your normal IT being insourced would understand because they know who the HR person is. The HR person probably handed them their offer letter when they hired them. But when we're coming in as an outside entity, we don't understand any of this workflow. We have no tribal knowledge of the organization at all. So what we're trying to do is build that familiarity with the organization so we know who are the key points of contact? Who's the CEO? So these are people that we typically give VIP treatment. So for instance, if I have an issue that comes into the help desk where I've got a printer that's low on cyan ink, that's going to come in as a priority 4 or a maintenance issue, unless it's this person. Those are all things to consider. So that's kind of the second stage of the game. Developing those points of contact through a verbal interview process with whoever our point of contact is internally.
So another benefit going through this process is
it forces you to create process. It forces you to create procedure. It forces these things sometimes, these approval chains. Part of our documentation that we go through there's 3 pages of just questionnaire, like, okay, who approves new computer purchases? What happens when that person leaves? How do we go about getting that equipment back in? And then what do we do with it? Do we back up their data and archive it? Or do we just throw it in the pile with the rest of them? How are we doing all those asset management things that typically when customers are handling their IT internally, there's no third party that's auditing what's happening within that IT department. So the practices and the procedures, the process and procedure that's within their internal IT department is basically a free-for-all.
We've heard all the talk about ShadowIT. How much of that do you think is attributable to lack of definition of?
100%. That's where it came from. It's because my IT department can't do this for me, right? So I'm going to figure out how to do it myself. That's why those processes are so important. And some of them are very easy to establish. We have best practices that we use, templates from. When we come into an organization and say, do you have a business continuity disaster recovery policy? Yes. What is it? Is it written down? Is it documented? Has it been tested? How frequently do you test it? What are your recovery time objectives? What are your recovery point objectives? All those things that are super important to the business leadership, but it doesn't have the time, effort, resources, capabilities to execute.
What about outside vendors? Let's say
vendors are a big part of that. So
equipment providers, hardware.
Who are my SaaS providers?
Oh, got it.
Who provides my servers and my firewalls? Are my branch offices, right? So if I have a branch office, I'm going to need a key point of contact in each branch office if I'm supporting that office from my centralized operations center, so that if this office goes offline, I can notify them. They can distribute that notification to their employees and say, hey, our office is offline. We've got an ISP outage. Netrio's escalated with the carrier, which I'm going to know from my vendor list. And then we'll bring it back online and communicate effectively.
Good.
So all of that, and then, of course, any key groups here, right? For instance, if my SaaS application is down, and let's say for HR, I use Workspace, but my finance department is not going to be concerned if Workspace is down. So if my SaaS provider has an outage, I'm listed as a qualified vendor. I'm going to turn around, I'm going to notify the end user community, because they're going to need to know that, hey, this is down, or I'm going to get an influx of support requests on my help desk of people calling in saying Workday's down. So this is that proactive approach towards notifying people before they have to tell you that something's wrong. So so we're gathering all those key points of contact. For my laptop vendor, let's say I'm using Dell or HP, right? I'm going to understand what these asset tags are associated with each of these assets. I'm going to tie that back to a vendor. I'm going to tie it back to a support contract. The support contract is going to have an SLA. So I'm going to understand, do I have next business day service on this asset or same business day service on this asset? That's going to do several things for me. It's going to tell me how to set the expectation for the end user if something goes wrong. If it's a service depot arrangement where they have to box it up and mail it back to their manufacturer, then I'm going to understand that based on that information that I'm gathering during that phase. Maybe we want to take the hard drive out of that, safeguard it until we're sure that their backup is working properly. All these things we use to make decisions around service delivery. And during this process, we're gathering all those critical systems contact information. So it starts out as kind of data entry. Think about it like an Excel spreadsheet, and it's actually called critical systems contact list. And so we're dividing these up into tiers. Obviously servers are at a very high tier. Things like printers or peripherals, scanners, USB, those are at a lower tier. Getting all of that information captured up front is critical to the service delivery aspect of the business, because you can't deliver service on that laptop if you don't know who it is, who made it, what the manufacturer model number is, when it was purchased, all those things.
Absolutely.